What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? You're listening to the Data is My Science podcast, the show to make data your passion. I am your host, Dapper Data. Today, I have a special guest on. His name is Tarush. He is an amazing, amazing person, and we're going to talk about how you can build your own data platform without building anything. Okay, he's going to explain that to you in very few simple words, right? And he's also going to be able to tell us how we can work on things like business analytics, right? We're going to talk about a little bit about business analytics. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of no code, all right? And look, in my eyes, no code. Okay, you're not going to lose your job, but we'll hear from the expert. Okay, we'll hear from the expert as to what he thinks, and also talk about data platform, what that means. All right, as you all know, my background has been storage, virtualization, programming, development, and now data science. And I truly believe data platforms are very important. You think about it from ingest all the way to visualization. Okay, you have to have a platform in place to be able to host all of that, right? That whole workflow from beginning to end. So it's important. So without further ado, I want to introduce you all to Tarush. Tarush, say hey.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on the show. Very excited to be here and hopefully add some value to your audience.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure you will. Tarush is the founder and CEO of 5X. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about 5X. That offers data reporting as a service, so users can make data-driven decisions faster. And I always talk about data-driven decisions, how important that is. And it's necessary to succeed in all aspects. Right? We've talked to pharmaceutical companies. We've talked to restaurants, right? And so when you're talking to all these different companies, one thing that we found out is that they make data driven decisions all the time. And so Tarush is going to be able to help us out with that. He is also one of the leading experts in leveraging data for exponential growth in the world. And previously, okay, this is one of my favorite parts about his background is that he actually used to work at WeWork. Okay, I love WeWork. I've talked about it before in my podcast. I am, and I never try to sell WeWork, right? I'm not getting any money for it or anything like that. But, I like going to places to really get away and be able to think and do work on my own. I can do my podcast in there. I can do all that good stuff. So fun stuff. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Tarush. Tarush, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Um, yeah, happy to give you a little bit of background on myself. I was fortunate enough went to engineering school, did computer science at Carnegie Mellon, and got a job out of college in Silicon Valley at a company called Salesforce. And very early, I think on my first day of work, I realized I'm going to be a terrible software engineer. And
Mhm.
was, and a lot of it for me was, number one, obviously, software engineering is extremely important, right? It's the backbone of technology. But I wasn't very interested, in like large company software engineering, where you're working on a small feature on a product, and a lot of that product is already built, so it's more
Mhm.
like maintain and incremental updates, and that just wasn't exciting for me. And back in this was 2011, data was very much at its infancy, and
Mhm.
Salesforce didn't have a dedicated data team. Facebook at that time, had just really announced these roles called data engineer. It was very much at its infancy, and a guy called Maxim, maybe probably the sort of godfather of data engineering, had just written this blog post on which is called "The Rise of the Data Engineer," and I found
Mhm.
it was just a very exciting time, and was in the right place at the right time. Got to work with a product manager at Salesforce, and really they built the first version of um, extracting metric from log files at Salesforce, which later became how we did things like benchmarking and usage metrics across different features, across different clouds. And that really became the sort of foundation of the data team. And I think that experience was really profound for me in, making this switch towards sort of data. long story short, been really fortunate to like ride that wave over the last 12 13 years.
Mhm.
Stuck very sort of focused on that lane, and about um, a year and a half ago, I sort of started 5x with the goal of really making it very, very simple for for your seed round of your Series A type of companies, or or anything bigger, to be able to get the same level of infrastructure and data platform as companies like Salesforce or WeWork or any of these larger
Mhm.
companies might have, with 50 or 100 people working on sort of building this out. Sort of really, the goal which we're playing it is that in the next 10 years, data is going to become as commonplace as digital marketing is today, where
Mhm.
often speak to companies who are not fully sure what their product is, but they know what they sort of go to market or the digital marketing strategy is, right? It's become so mainstream, and all of a sudden, we see is that digital marketing is now becoming, it's no longer a competitive advantage. And really, digital marketing 2.0, or the next step is really data. And then
Mhm.
basically that's what we're really trying to focus on. Sorry, that was a really long introduction. I got excited at some point.
No, no, no. That's great. And I'm glad like you're explaining that background. And you brought up a good point, right? Data will be that deciding factor, right? Going forward. I truly believe the same thing because when you look at data, right, it's that supportive nature for me, right? It supports your decisions that you're making because you really can't, not unless it's bias or something, right? Just push that, which there's a lot of that, right? And it's not clean, and that's a whole other topic. But most of the time, right, you can't deny the facts, right, that are there put in front of you, and so I think that that would be the way to beat the competitive advantage, right? You have the data right there in front of you, helping you make those decisions, data-driven decisions. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into 5x, right? How do you like explain what 5x really does, right? That would be a good starting point because I looked at the website and it is an amazing, amazing company that you have developed. You have started out, you and your team, and I think the world needs to understand a little bit better about what 5S is doing.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for the kind words. And kind of as you said earlier, a sort of one line is build your own data platform without building anything. And
Hmm.
you know to go one level deeper, what is really a data platform? Now, to understand that, we need to understand that your average company today, your average startup has got over 10 different data sources. So you have your
Hmm.
backend databases, you might have your CRM and Salesforce, you might have Facebook ads, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, you might have help desk software with Intercom or Zendesk, you might have Stripe integration, some like marketing tools, some email marketing. um, you know there are over 200 different data sources, and your average company is using 10 at any point. And I'm not talking about like Slack and Zoom and software. I'm talking about actual sources of like customer data, which are really valuable for you to know. Now,
Hmm.
in this world where we have all these different data sources, when a company is just sort of starting off, you might use like Facebook ad manager, or you might use Google Analytics to track your web traffic. But you reach this point, and that's typically seed, early Series A, where you've found
Hmm.
product market fit, and you know what you're doing, and you have a product which works, and now you need to go scale this. And all of a sudden, you realize that you need a more holistic way of looking at data. How do you correlate Facebook and Google ads, and which is the better one? Or how do you look at your customer life cycle, all the way from marketing, sales, to onboarding, to engagement, to sort of renewals, and answer questions holistically. And in
Hmm.
order to do that, you need to, very simply, you need to have a central place to analyze, model, structure, clean sort of data. So you
Right.
need to basically start to centralize it. And that is really the sort of foundation of what a data platform does. it gives you the ability to make sense from all of your data coming from all these different data sources. Now, this sounds quite simple, but if you look at how it's set up today, just in order to, you know, ingest your data, then to store it, then to clean it, structure it, and build reporting,
Mm-hmm.
eventually push it back into some of these systems. So you have intelligence in these systems to surface customer dashboards. All of these, each of these are individual vendors, and I just named,
Mm-hmm.
8 9 different vendors. And the way the industry is set up today is you have to go you'll go to each of these vendors, you'll sign an enterprise contract, which means you're negotiating, your legal team is reviewing a contract, and then you have to go stitch this together and build your own platform, which takes companies 4 months today. So
Mm-hmm.
before you really get started, you've probably spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in hiring talent and signing these contracts, paying for a lot of them up front if they don't have self-service, and then stitching this together. And moving forward, you're spending about 30% of your time on maintenance of just
I'm
keeping.
about to say they have to maintain it, right?
So, in some ways, this made sense 5 years ago because companies like WeWork and Salesforce and Twitter and large tech companies would deploy an army of engineers to go do this. Well, if every company is going to do data in the next 10 years, what percentage of companies, like 95% of companies, want to be users and not really, they don't need to be creators of their own stack and have
Mm-hmm.
some custom infrastructure. So what 5x really does is we want to be, in some ways, the sort of Squarespace of the modern data stack, right? If you think of
Mm-hmm.
a company like Squarespace before it existed, to like deploy your website, you needed to do, have a separate design team, a front end team, an infrastructure team, deploy it, monitor it. And in Squarespace, made this really easy. You had e-commerce plugins, and you had
Mm-hmm.
analytics and deployment and drag and drop, and very very simple, where a single person could get a lot of value. So in some ways, and that's one analogy to like look at 5x. We basically partner with all of these best in class vendors. So
Mm-hmm.
have um, for those of you who are familiar with some of the data vendors, so Snowflake, Fivetran,
Mm-hmm.
DBT, companies like Tableau, Preset, Mix,
Oh.
Segment. These are
Mm-hmm.
the usual suspects when you think about
Mm-hmm.
all these different categories in data. What 5x does is we have integrations, API integrations with these vendors. We have billing contracts pre-negotiated. We have a large platform, a large data engineering team, and we've really allow you to pick and choose which vendors make sense for you. And then at the push of a button, we would deploy your own accounts with each of these vendors, and we would stitch it all together. So it's all pre-configured, pre-set up, and at the end of the month, you get one bill uh, for your infrastructure. This is dependent on either on basically how you use the platform. So it scales up. Does that make
No,
sense?
that's all. No, it makes a lot of sense to me. And I think the audience, I think you've definitely broken it down for audience. And you mentioned a couple things there, right? Which was amazing to me. But some of the things that stood out, right? A lot of people use some of those tools that you mentioned, like Tableau, right? Like,
Sure.
and then also you didn't mention this, but I'm assuming if you compare Tableau, that's like Microsoft BI, right? Those type of platforms that are out there. Um, those platforms are heavily used today in many companies. Okay, and you almost have to have this specific skill set to know Tableau, right? And if you try to transfer it over, the foundation maybe of Microsoft BI, but you still got to have this specific skill set with that, right? But all of that sums up to it reminds me of a story. I remember being when I first started working in the tech industry, and I went over to a person, right? This woman, she was over there and like across from me, and she said, she had. Well, this is not when I first started working in the tech industry, but this was later on, probably about 3 years ago. But she said, "Hey, I am a business analyst, right?" She said, "I'm a business analyst." She had Tableau up. She said she had Microsoft BI up. She had these other visualization tools up, right? And And at the time, I really didn't understand as much about them. And I was like, well, I've never heard of a business analyst, right? I've heard of data analysts. I've heard of data scientists. And I was like, what the crap? What the heck is that? Are we just making up positions now? And so, over time, I kind of started to understand that there's differentiators between all of that, right? Talk a little bit about, the importance of business analytics, right? I want to dive into that because you all are solving a problem that helps out with the business analyst as well.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, going one level higher, right? Just to kind of set some context. Now, no one is doing data for the sake of doing data, right? Like no one is for the sake of building it. It's always a means to optimize the business. It's fundamentally
Mm,
the purpose of data is three things. Either number one is to make more money for the business. That's
mhm,
typically the sort of go-to-market strategy. Where are your customers coming from? Which sort of channels do you have? How do you basically get more customers? Which channels to focus on and which channels to not? Right? It's everything around go.
mhm,
Number two is to really in some ways save money, right? How do you who are your customers, how they're using your product, how do you personalize your product for your different type of customers, how do you increase engagement and decrease churn and really save the business money. So that's broadly speaking the sort of second use case, which is how do you uh, you know how do you increase engagement, how do you save money for the business. The third
mhm,
one, is around optimization. Now, whether this could be optimizing supply chain, it could be uh, it could be better visibility into where you're spending money, who are your best sales reps, how do you make customer service more efficient. Whatever the use case is, it's around really optimizing the business, which is doing more with less. So,
mhm,
you know, this is the reason any company is sort of doing it, right? And you can have the data infrastructure, you can have the data engineers, you can have the data scientists, but really, you know, there is this layer of how do you take these insights which the business or these capabilities which the business is producing and start to make sense of that. And that is really where analytics starts, or like your analyst starts to really sort of come in. So your analysts in some ways are they're taking the output of this data platform of your data scientists, of your data engineers, and they're working with the business to essentially implement or action or really change the language of these metrics in a way which is really digestible by the business. Does that kind of make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. So, what would you say your typical persona is when it comes down to 5X, right? Like that customer, right?
Sure,
Is it the data scientist? Is
sure.
it the engineer, or is
Yeah,
it the CTO, right? I
yeah.
mean, what is it?
So, the buyer of who we are really focused on at this stage is, the CTO of, a seed or Series A company. Again, kind of as I said earlier, they found some sort of product market fit and they now need to go invest inside the data ecosystem. And
Mm-hmm.
that's often very overwhelming. They ask them all the same questions you're asking is, what's a data engineer? What's a data analyst? Which tools do
Mm-hmm.
we like? And we take away it's just like marketing today or digital marketing today is a lot more than a post on Instagram. In that same way, d- data today is a lot more than hiring a data analyst, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's, in some ways we take away all that complexity. So our buyer is the CTO of a company at the moment. And depending on the company size, if the company is a little bit bigger, it could be head of data or someone on the data team. But the people who use our platform are what become your data team. So that is your data analyst, your data engineer, your sort of data scientist. They're the ones who want access to these tools. They're interested in exploring new tools, in adding new tools to the stack, potentially interested in looking at how these tools talk to each other, and having a data set, a fully set up data set across the entire platform to have a template of of how do you build some of these analysis. Um, so yeah.
No, I appreciate you giving that answer because a lot of our audience they want to know the differentiation, right, between all that. They want to understand that background, you know. So when we talk about no code, right, you know, I mentioned no code earlier. There's like low code, there's no code, right? You know, for me, I'm a huge coder, right? You
Yeah,
know, that's just my
sure.
background. And so at one point,
Yeah,
I'll be completely honest to the audience, when I ended up hearing this word no code, I was like, oh crap, I'm going to lose my freaking job.
yeah,
You know, and I'm pretty sure that's a lot of people that do that, right? And when you think about low code and no code tools, you know, I'm thinking, will that help developers go faster and build more, or does it take away opportunities for them, right? You
yeah,
know, what's your thoughts on that?
sure. I love this question, and I'm going to stay very specific to the data context just so that I
Mm-hmm.
can go a lot deeper, because it's very contextual depending on the field, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there could be some similarities in software, but for the sake of being able to answer your question in a good way, I want to kind of go a lot deeper in the data space. So, you know, I think I think a lot of industries or a lot of fields follow a triangle, and the
Mm-hmm.
triangle is more like a sort of pyramid. And if you look at the data pyramid, in some ways, a lot of people compare it to like Maslow's pyramids of needs, but this sort of data pyramid. But layer one is infrastructure, and that is the tools you need to pull data from different sources and to model it and to clean it. And then
Mm-hmm.
the next layer on top of that could be data sets, right? And the layer on top of that is data modeling, and then reporting, and then you know analysis, and then machine learning, and then recommendations, right? So you have these layers which are really built on top of each other, and each of these layers has typically required a different skill set. So you have infrastructure or data platform engineers, and on top of that you have data engineers, and on top of that you have data analysts, and on top of that you have data scientists. And what these roles are really doing is they're working on the output of the previous layer in order to do their jobs and to produce a better layer of simplification of infrastructure, simplification, modeling, insights, which ultimately help the business. So what when I think about a platform like 5x, what 5x is doing is removing your need to really build out your infrastructure to do this sort of integration, to really hiring these data platform engineers. We're really solving a lot of that and really making it even one level, making it a lot easier for your data engineers to do what they're meant to do. So in some ways,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can call us a no code because you don't have to go manually build these integrations and stitch them together. But we're the low code of layers one and partly layers two. So, what in some ways we are doing is, yes, as a data platform engineer, we're in some ways, competing. I wouldn't say really competing, but smaller companies probably not going to hire these engineers anyway. But we're building a layer of abstraction, or we're starting to sort of commoditize the sort of lowest layer of the pyramid. Now, by doing this, there's no way we're getting rid of code, because if you want to
Mm-hmm.
clean your data and model it and build reporting, you know you're still writing SQL for that. In order to do data scientist, in order to do data
Mm-hmm.
science, you're still writing Python code for that. You're just not
Mm-hmm.
writing that first two layers of the triangle. So
Ah, right, right.
when you think about, is this taking on jobs, I think the answer is always, we're really taking those layers of abstraction and moving it more upstack. Where, hey, if you're a company
Mm-hmm.
like WeWork, I can talk about the WeWork example. Probably had a 100% data team. About 25 of those people were working on the data platform, which is layers one, layers two. What 5x makes very compelling to even a company of that size is like, why do you need those 25 people? What comparative advantage does WeWork have in building out its own data platform? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a company like Google, or it's not a company like Facebook, which is really needs to have this because they're doing things which no one else has ever done. um, 5x gives you an opportunity to basically take that talent, and instead of hiring those infrastructure engineers, hire more data scientists, hire more data analysts, hire more data engineers who are focused much closer to actually driving business output for the business using the infrastructure.
Wow.
So it's always,
Right.
in some ways, using the Amazon example is like, companies, used to have a lot more database administrators. This was a sort of title 10 years ago, just optimizing a database. And with modern databases like Postgres and data warehouses, you don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Those people haven't lost jobs. Those people are just reskilled into moving higher up the stack, higher up the food chain. And a lot of those people today would be considered data analysts, or they would be DevOps engineers, or some of them would be software engineers. So in the same way, we feel like it's time for some of the infrastructure grunt work of data platform to go away, and companies to start to focus um, on a higher level of abstraction.
Yeah, and many organizations. So I've come across many organizations that prefer to build from scratch. Right.
Sure.
To be honest, I mean, especially working at these different agencies. But you think about the time efficiency of
Yeah.
it, right? You think about like how like you're trying to build this from scratch. You can get the
Sure.
same end result
Yeah.
by using a platform like yours, right? You're sitting there trying to build everything from scratch, and then your time to mission, right,
Yeah.
is it takes long as crap now, right? Do you see competitiveness against people right now that are trying to build from scratch and
Sure.
complete end-to-end solution?
I think when you say build from scratch, again, it's very relative, right? Like building from scratch is, at the very lowest foundation layer. It's at the HTTP layer, you're reinventing the packet, like, uh,
Right.
at the, compiler layer, at the, deployment, at the deployment layer, you in some ways building your own Amazon Web Services or building your own EC2. And the answer is,
Mm-hmm.
even when we talk about the build versus buy or the build from scratch, you're assuming a base layer which you're building on top of. And
All
that
right.
layer today is, you're probably using Kubernetes, right? So
Mm-hmm.
not managing, deploying across thousands of instances, and like auto scaling and scaling up and scaling down. And you're probably using some sort of JDBC driver, and you're
Mm-hmm.
probably using some sort of framework, whether it's like the Django framework or Ruby on Rails, just depending on what you are, right? So,
Right.
so building from scratch, base layer has changed so much. It's gone 5 layers up
You're right.
in the last 5 layers. So
Great point.
matter, if a company is sort of starting on base layer 4 or 6, and you might, in your case, what you're saying is if a business is, a lot more like to build from scratch, they might be 1 or 2 layers behind where the industry starts off today, because they're really building from scratch. Now,
Yeah.
like 5x, we're sort of definitely building the next base layer, right? And there'll be a
Mm-hmm.
percentage, there'll be like 50% of customers who will be like, yeah, this makes sense, we would rather start at the next base layer. And there might be, a percentage of customers who don't see it's sort of valuable right now. But guess what? Over the next 1 or 2 or 3 years, as we start building the next layer, the next layer, and the next layer, it's just a matter of time before this layer becomes so sort of standard. So, we don't really see, are we competing with companies who want to do it from scratch? The industry is adding more and more layers. That's just what, like, as data becomes more mainstream, that's just what happens. And, we believe it's time for this layer to sort of be gone. So it doesn't matter if you use us now, you use us sort of 2 years from now, or you could use it,
Right.
other people. But that's really where we're going. Does that make sense?
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you just said you shed a lot of light on the fact that it's the perspective, right, of the end user and what they believe that building from scratch is. Because like years ago, right? Building from scratch was writing C code down to the
Yeah.
garbage collection and all that crap, right? You know, now it could be like you said, building from scratch could be where you're at right now, and then 10 years from now, it's just like the as a service models that go on, right? The infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. Eventually, you don't have to do anything, right? You're just moving little pieces around, and that still could be called building from scratch because that's the way the industry is going, you know. So I like that.
We always add more layers of abstraction at the I mean, we always, go higher up the chain, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
AI and sort of recommendation and insights is still very much at the infancy, but we're starting to add a few layers there, which means that there are only a certain amount of layers we can actually sort of control and focus on before it just gets too much for the human brain to sort of even sort of comprehend. So naturally speaking, if you're interested in like one layer up, at some point it's like how do you let go of the sort of last layer of right?
Right.
I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy as we want to get more advanced and more like AI that we
Hmm.
we start to get rid of more of the infrastructure. It's not like getting rid
Yeah.
of it, it's still very much there, but making it exponentially easier.
Right. Right. It's about ease being easier. Yeah.
Things like Chef and sort of Kubernetes and other technologies like that didn't get rid of like managing your software deployment process. They basically made it a lot easier to manage. And
Right.
that's really, that's the same way which we look at building your data platform without actually building physical integrations between different layers of your data stack.
Right, right. So talking about that data platform really quick, and I know there's something you definitely highlighted. We talked about the importance, but really making that connection between because me as a data scientist, right, I understand because I came from the data platform background, right? I came from that background to be able to understand how important it is as a developer and data scientist. Do you believe that it's very important for a developer, a data scientist, to understand what a data platform is, or do you think that separation is okay or cool?
I think it's like relative, right? Depending on the company size. At a larger company size, you're a lot more mature. You can expect high quality sort of data models. You can expect this to be
Hmm.
QA. You don't need to worry about it. At a startup, for a lot of data scientists, a lot of data scientists who are the first hires, maybe at that point the sort of the hiring managers didn't understand that in order for a data scientist to do their job, you need to have the data infrastructure in place, the data flowing in
Hmm.
centrally, it clean, it model is structured. So if you're a data scientist who doesn't have all of that, chances are you're not really even doing data science because you're going to be spending
Hmm.
90% of your time building the platform, cleaning, ingesting, modeling, structuring before you even get into it, right? So I think it's sort of
Right.
relative. In the last 2 3 years, we've seen the most common story in data science is I'm not doing any data science work because the company I'm working for doesn't understand that there needs to be a lot more before you can sort of do data science, right? And going back to my analogy, you're trying to design the penthouse of your skyscraper when you haven't really built your first floor. Um,
Hmm.
you know, that's typically what's happening, and all of a sudden now, with maybe 5x being one of them, but with more advancements in like even some of the clouds like Google Cloud making a few things easier,
Hmm.
tools like DBT, this is all of a sudden
Hmm.
it's not that daunting, but still it's still very very much real. So I think a few years from now, as some of these layers become as building foundations and your first 10 15 floors of your skyscraper really become um, a lot more streamlined, you will be able to live in a world where as a data scientist you don't need to care about a lot of the layers before. I think as it
Hmm.
stands sort of today, someone graduating from college today, um, I wouldn't. It's not might not be important to have a PhD on like the layers before, but I think
Hmm.
working knowledge of how they work will be a massive competitive advantage at least for the next few years.
Right, I agree. It may not be a necessity, but it definitely is an advantage to have that knowledge and background. You
I mean,
know,
if you don't have it, you're like removing yourself from working from like 60-70% of companies who
mhm.
don't have that layer, that level of maturity. uh,
That's a
so
great
basically,
point.
apart from big tech, um, you probably won't be able to work at a startup or a mid-sized company,
Mhm.
unless you sort of understand that. And no sort of, I think, just as an industry develops, like it's just the most exciting time to work in data in an earlier stage company, because there's just so much
Mhm.
happening. So my recommendation would be, it's, you know there's more exciting stuff happening in those intermediate layers sort of today. There's more business value created today in the modeling, in the reporting, in the data, in sort of the metrics layer, sort of today, necessarily than the pure data scientist. Here's my
Mhm.
fancy data model which predicts X.
Right.
Um, I think we're yeah, I think there's more value in the intermediate layers today than the highest layer.
I agree. I agree. So, thank you again for being on the Data is My Science podcast. At the end, I like to end with a dope nugget or gem. And for what I've learned today is that those customer data platforms, they serve as that foundational layer, right? For things like marketing, personalization, right? Sales enablement, customer experience and more. Whatever it is, right? That end to end from ingestion to the end, right? I always say visualization, and there may be another end past that, but that whole transformation process, I think that data platform is very, very key, and it's not a tool with a single dedicated use, right? It has a wide variety of potential applications out there, right? And that customer data platform, those users are continuously discovering new ways to use it. So, is there anything that you want to leave the audience with today?
I think the biggest recommendation I would give you is investing in a data strategy. Uh,
Mm.
and, like you can do it in like whichever way which makes sense for you, but not doing it is probably the best is the best mistake to avoid.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. That is a that is a dope nugget for sure. For any organization, whether small or big. All right, let's get into this game really quick. The game that I like to play is called Overrated, Underrated. As we talked about it before, I got it from shout out to Gary Vee, a mentor of mine. This is an amazing game. I love it. It keeps it exciting, right? It shows the audience that we're not just geeks all the time. We care about some of the stuff that y'all care about too, right? We have opinions about it, if anything. All right, so I asked you about 4 or 5 topics, maybe seven, and you
Sure.
get a chance to choose whether you think it's overrated, underrated, or right where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, dancing.
Underrated.
Underrated? You love to dance?
I think living in like South America for a year last year, for sure, had too little dancing in my life, and just find
Hmm.
it a sort of beautiful way to like connect and express.
Okay, okay. I love dancing myself. All right, traveling.
Uh, I think it's where it's at. I think
Uh-huh.
it's pretty rated. I think traveling is, as someone who travels, it spent 6 months of the year traveling. Um, I think traveling is one of the best experiences in life. Um,
Hmm.
but I think there's enough hype, there's enough, talk, there's enough sort of resources around travel, um, such so that I think it's sort of properly rated in terms of the sort of joy as well as the hype around it. So what it gives you.
Hmm. All right, the Brooklyn Bridge.
Uh, I think the Brooklyn Bridge is properly rated. Uh,
Okay, okay.
I mean, obviously, it could be wider and bigger and faster. But I don't really get stuck on the Brooklyn Bridge, maybe on the Manhattan part, because of
Uh,
bridge, but it's also got the cycling parts and the walking, and it's part of like popular culture, for
mhm.
tourists visiting. So I think the Brooklyn Bridge is where it's at, is correctly rated.
All right, the printer.
Overrated. It's time for it to go.
Time for it to go, man. I'm with you with that. All right, New Year's Eve celebrations.
Overrated. Uh,
I'm with you with that, man, too.
it's yeah. I mean, I love this line where it's one of the lines that really inspires me, which is build a life you don't need to vacation from, where
Mhm,
every day could be that vacation for you. Um, and there's a lot of things going on in that line, which is like, obviously loving what you do, and, being able to have the freedom to be able to, to be able to make all time playtime, not necessarily have that much differentiation. And I look at New Year's as the same kind of myth, right? Where it's like the myth of a
mhm.
vacation, where you
Right.
every day could be that party, that big celebration, that big whatever you're looking for. There's no one day of the year you have to wait for that.
That's true. That's true. I like it. I like it. Well, Tarush, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. Um, this is the Science Podcast audience, the show that makes data your passion. I'm your host, Dapper Data. Thank you again, Tarush. Where can they reach you at? And is there anything that you're promoting right now?
Uh, I mean, you can reach us in all sorts of channels. Our website is 5x.co. Uh, you can reach me on Twitter at, it's just my name. It's at Tarush. Um, Instagram is I am Tarush. You can reach out to 5x. You can reach out to me directly at Tarush at 5x.co. Um, so yeah, I would love to hear from you. Happy to have any of these conversations, and um, thank you so much for having me on the show, and hope um, this was valuable to your audience.
Yeah, definitely, definitely will. I appreciate it. Thank you again, audience. And you can reach me at Mr. Dapper Data on any one of the social media platforms. Love you all. Peace. Till next time.